What's going on, everyone? Scott here. Welcome back to the channel. So, Michigan State football finishes their 2025 football season 4-8, 1-8 in the Big Ten, and come here on Sunday. JBAT has announced that Michigan State will be firing head coach Jonathan Smith after just 2 seasons here at Michigan State, and will be heading in a different direction. Now, we do kind of already have, it's not been officially announced by the school, but by every source, it seems like that former Northwestern coach Pat Fitzgerald will be the next head coach of Michigan State football. So we're going to kind of just here talk about it fully. We're not going to dive too deep into, Fitzgerald and what that could mean for Michigan State. We'll dive into it a little bit, but obviously once it's official, and then also too kind of, I think a big part of the opinion on Pat Fitzgerald will be on who he brings in on his staff. So, but we're going to talk about it first. If you could just hit that like and subscribe button down there. We'll have more Michigan State football content on the channel. What's this coaching search is, or not coaching search, what's this coaching hire is finished up here. Staff bringing in. Then obviously signing day is on Wednesday this week coming up. Got the portal coming up and in January coming up here. So a lot of stuff will be happening in Michigan State football here over the next month or so. So just make sure to subscribe here so you don't miss a video. So Jonathan Smith, we'll kind of just start there with that. Obviously, if you've watched the channel at all here, I've been a Jonathan Smith defender for the most part throughout his tenure here. I thought he was a really good hire. And then obviously which no one is saying this like at all, that he's a bad person. Everyone says up and down how good of a person he is. His players swear by him, coaching staff swears by him as well. So that was always a given. And I think that's what always was going to make this so hard moving on from Jonathan Smith, was the type of person he is. And unfortunately, it just didn't work out here at Michigan State. I, had kind of been back and forth over the last month of the season, whether I thought that it was the right move and whether I thought that it would happen. Once it got to a certain point that it was like, okay, you're going to go 3-9, you're going to go 4-8, maybe 0 or 1 wins in the Big Ten. Like, okay, you probably have to make a move. But as I said, over the last couple weeks, I don't think this is a move that necessarily was wanted to be made by, new athletic director Jay Pat. Obviously, he's been here for, half the year. What was it? May, June that he came in. So, he's been here for a solid 5-6 months, but I don't think this was a decision that he wanted to make right now. Everyone involved wanted this to work out, top to bottom, from Smith to his staff. Like, love some people that he brought in on his staff, thought that it would work out. The players that he brought in, that came over from Oregon State with him as well. But then the young guys, transfer portal guys, like, everyone wanted this to work out, but it just didn't. And I guess kind of just to close out the Jonathan Smith era here is kind of the questions that everyone wants to, kind of talk about overall is 2 years enough time to, one, kind of essentially rebuild a program from where we were at 2 years ago? And is that enough time to show what this thing can look like going forward? One, I think unequivocally, no, it is not enough time to rebuild a program. But then two, it's kind of what we've talked about and kind of been the story of the season, is kind of it's almost like the team regressed, especially on the offensive side, which is what obviously Jonathan Smith was known for. Obviously, which this is to a lot of Michigan State fans, was one of their bigger problems with him, was that he is a hands-off head coach, and he said it. And I feel like it's a good thing and a bad thing. Is he's kind of hands-off in terms of like during the game, and what drove people crazy about him was, the headset's up. He's not saying much during the game. He'll, give it down, give his opinion on 1 or 2 things it looks like during the game. Especially I'm someone who always watches the sidelines, the coaches, kind of what's going on, and you look at it like he has it down a few times during the game, but majority of the game his mic's up and he lets the coaches coach, and he kind of just oversees the big picture thing, which, yes, in theory is what a head coach is supposed to do, especially of a big operation like this. But that obviously a lot of people didn't like that, and that was kind of the knock on him for a lot of the things. Like, hey, the thing's kind of falling down here. Like, can you grab a rope and you're the leader, kind of lead us to pull us back up in this thing? And overall, it's just, he was an offensive guy, and it seemed like the offense is what had the biggest kind of regression throughout the season when that was supposed to be like, hey, kind of second year, a lot of young, new pieces on defense. Second year, like let's see some improvement. But we expect the offense to keep us in this game. This offense is why we were supposed to win 6, 7 football games at minimum, and that just didn't happen. The offense definitely regressed. I don't think all of that is completely on him. Some of it is, yes, I think that the injuries are, the injuries are what they are. But I also think it's the depth, which kind of coincides with those injuries as well. I think the playmakers are there, but I just think the depth, the offensive line, and whatnot, I think is what ended up, making the offense look like what it looked like this year. But then also, I think a lot of blame has to be on offensive coordinator Brian Lindgren. I mean, some of those play calls, during the game, and I hate to listen. A lot of people have a piece of the pie of this of why it didn't work out, but some of the play calling was absolutely atrocious for a lot of the season. Just didn't make sense. But at the end of the day, and you have to credit Smith, which just goes to the type of person he is he said multiple times this season, like, hey, I'm the head coach. Like, my name's on the thing. I have to take responsibility. I'm at the head of this thing. So, and I thought he handled that. I thought he handled the fans, the Fire Smith chants, the everything, kind of that apathy that became around the program. I thought he handled it all well. Again, that just goes to the type of person he is. So, it's unfortunate that it didn't work out here. But I mean, when you, in your second year, when you go 4-8, 1-8 in the Big Ten, you got 2 years without a bowl game, and now overall you're sitting at 4 straight years without a bowl game, and only one bowl game since Mark Antonio retired. Things. I think the apathy around the program. I think a lot of this has to do, and I've said this multiple times, is the fan base being so ready to flip the switch kind of here on this thing and kind of pull the rope, I guess, if you will, is kind of how the end of the last coaching tenure ended. Obviously, that was, obviously a disaster. And then I think with the kind of what I've said multiple times too, is the part of the fan base that never give, fan base and the donor base that never gave Jonathan Smith a fair shot in this thing. Like, obviously, yes, you can say all of this wouldn't have mattered if he just won. If he made a bowl game last year, made a bowl game this year, like whatever, like all this wouldn't have been a problem. Like, you can always want more, but if he would have won, 2 or 3 more football games total through last year, this year, whatever, no, we wouldn't be having this discussion right now. But, at the end of the day, you just got to win. And it wasn't, but I don't think he ever really got a fair shot here, unfortunately, because of the, part of the fan base and the donor base that was so fixated on getting Urban Meyer. And when Urban Meyer wasn't the guy, then they weren't going to support the guy or anyone who was an Urban Meyer. So I understand if you have your guy or thought that we should have went to a different direction, whatever, but being a fan and not fully getting behind a coach at the beginning, which was the case for a decent amount of the fan base, never getting behind Jonathan Smith from the beginning, then, that's, not a recipe for success. And then when the donor base, who with this era of college football isn't behind you as well, and you don't have the money, because it's been documented that, they were in on good, transfer portal guys or good recruits, whatever. And the staff, again, that throughout their time here has shown to be in early on talented guys that maybe late risers, and we've been able to keep some as well. But even the 2 or 3 recruits that we lost this upcoming recruiting cycle, got them when they were lower rated recruits, and then they just kind of steadily rose. So good at evaluating talent, but some of them, they just got outbid at the end of the day. So yeah, I think that part falls on the fans and the donor base as well, not giving him that full support. But at the end of the day, you got to win more games, unfortunately, and it sucks. Like I said, I still like Jonathan Smith a lot, and I'll be, wherever he goes next, I'll personally be rooting for him. I know some people won't be, unfortunately, but I think he's a really good football coach, and more importantly, even a better person. So I'll be pulling for him. But kind of the fast shift here, and how none of this has kind of came out, and it's not also official yet, but by all accounts, it seems like Pat Fitzgerald, former Northwestern coach, is going to be the next head coach here at Michigan State. Kind of mixed opinions on him from the fan base and kind of from me as well so far. Obviously, he was at Northwestern for 17 years. We all know this, 110 and 101 won a couple Big Ten West championships, 5 bowl wins, and then over his last 2 years, though, went 4 wins and 20 losses over those last 2 years. So not fantastic, but overall, I think he's a guy that is kind of the thing I keep going back to here is he's more of a historical culture fit for Michigan State. Looking at it, so I think that's like kind of one box checked. Kind of another box is he knows the Midwest, he knows the Big Ten. Obviously, coaching at Northwestern, so he knows this area. He's been in this area. He played at Northwestern, so he's played in the Big Ten, coached in the Big Ten, all of this stuff. So he knows that's coming in. But you know, I think he's going to bring a toughness and a guy that if everyone keeps wanting to go back to the College Game Day podcast it was on with Reese Davis, Pete Thamel a couple weeks ago, and it does. It seems like he's spent these couple years outside of football because obviously with everything that went on at Northwestern, and then him being kind of vindicated, I guess if you will, later or earlier this year, and then now kind of trying to get back into the coaching thing, coaching ranks here. Is he said that he used that time to kind of really kind of study, and in his words, to get a PhD on what this world of college football is now, because obviously it is different, and that's one of the, if you have two piles here, one of the things that you can put in the worry pile, it's hey, quite a bit has changed even in just the 4 years or so that you've been out of college football. So, but it sounds like he has been kind of ears to the ground and kind of working to try to study and see what is needed to be successful in this era. That's all good, but can it be executed? I think, and I get that's the risk you take with every coach. And again, I think the reason that I see is still kind of 50-50 here, at least in my opinion, and from the fan base, it seems like it's a majority 50-50 on whether it's a good hire, bad hire, kind of up in the air. I think that's a big part of it, but I think that with the options that were out there, I think that this was probably the best option for where we were at. Now, and it seems like from all reports, it seems like J-Bat's known this decision for a while, didn't announce any like widespread coaching search, and that it was just going to be Pat Fitzgerald. So, you can assume that he knew that this was going to be the case for a while. So I guess in that sense, why didn't this happen maybe a month ago? And then if you throw your name in with the likes of, say, like an Alex Golish or, some of those names, then, maybe it's a different story if you look at one of those guys. But I don't know. I don't know if maybe they go through that and they still think Pat Fitzgerald is the guy. I don't know. I know he's a guy that even looking back on some old videos before jumping on here is, he's a guy that always respected Michigan State a lot, and in turn, Michigan State respected him a lot. I didn't know this story or about how every time Michigan State and Northwestern played, Mark D'Antonio and Pat Fitzgerald would go out to dinner the night before. They got to know each other. When Mark D'Antonio retired, he was one of the coaches that came on Big Ten Network and was talking about Mark D'Antonio and the program he's built here. I know there's some pictures going around of Tom Izzo chatting with him on the sidelines a couple years ago. So I think that he'll be received well from internally at Michigan State, from Tom Izzo, from Mark D'Antonio. That support will be there. So I think a lot of this has to do with what's the staff that he's bringing in. I think it has to be, from the sounds of it, no numbers or anything yet, but he's going to have the backing of the donors, which is obviously something that, unfortunately, Jonathan Smith just didn't have from the beginning, to no fault of his own. So that's obviously a key step number one, but it's bringing in a top-tier offensive coordinator, and then obviously a defensive coordinator. Whether you keep in Joe Rossi, I'm fine with keeping in Joe Rossi with the guys that he's brought in on defense. I think there's good young talent on defense that you need to retain on this roster. I'm fine with keeping him, but then obviously the name Max Bullough, would love to see him back in the green and white. Everyone would. That's not a hot take. Like whatever. I'm curious though if he's not ready for a defensive coordinator job. I'm curious, would he leave Notre Dame, who is consistently in the ranks for the playoffs right now, and where they're at? Would he leave to come back to Michigan State for a similar role? I don't know, maybe more money and coming back to your alma mater, with, kind of maybe even like a co-defensive coordinator where you can kind of learn from Rossi. But, I don't know. Maybe they do just take a shot, give him a defensive coordinator position, given that, Pat Fitzgerald, he was a linebacker, he's a defensive mind as well. So, can kind of help him along there and then just hire top flight offensive staff. But then obviously the money has to be there to retain the roster and go out and recruit the roster. We talked obviously offensive line, defensive line as well, secondary, bringing in some more help. And really, those it's just depth. They have players at those positions. Like that, saying that isn't a diss at the guys that are at that position right now. It's just you need more. You need depth and some difference makers in certain spots. But I like all the guys that are there and the young guys that Jonathan Smith and his staff have brought in. You just need more depth, essentially, because you saw it on the offensive line. What happened? One or two injuries, you're already kind of behind the eight ball. But then you pile those up to 4 or 5 injuries, then it kind of looks how it looked over the last, month and a half of the season, unfortunately. So, that's kind of the big thing here with Pat Fitzgerald is what does the staff look like, and what does the total buy-in from the donors look like as well. That I think will be a big thing in determining, kind of tipping the scales from, everyone's kind of 50-50 on this hire right now to what that stuff looks like could swing the thing either way. So anyway, it's not official yet by any means, but it seems by all accounts it's going to be official here in the coming days. So we'll obviously be back to talk about all that once it's official and everything else that happens with signing day coming up here Wednesday, and then staff changes, everything, whatever the case may be. But anyway, if there is staff changes, assuming one way or another. But anyway, that'll do it for this one. Thank you all so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one. Peace out.